Hi, this is Lili Sanderson, and you're listening to Choosing Glory. Thanks very much for joining me. We're going to talk about the Psalms today. There will be 2 lessons on the Psalms, so this is the first half. First, let me explain. I'm in a different setting because I have mold mitigation going on in many places in my house right now, and one of them is the podcast room. So I've been ejected from there, and it needs to be rebuilt now that the work has been done. And honestly, these are places, every place that they found, this company came in with mold detection dogs, and they were very thorough, very impressive animals. And every place that they found were places that I remembered we had had a leak or a problem with the roof or something. And of course, we had had all those things repaired, and we always asked if they were treating for mold and making sure that that wouldn't be a problem. And they all said that they had. But apparently the efforts or the things that they did were not really sufficient to stop it from continuing to grow. So my house is really ripped up right now in several locations, which has been interesting. And I've had people here every day, all day for over a week now, and they should be done soon. But then the rebuilding will have to begin. So it has kind of thrown off my timing, and I apologize. Trying to make this short because Doug isn't having a lot of time to get these edited and ready to post. We had a little bit of a buffer for a while, but it's kind of gone. So I hope to build that up again. But in the meantime, I'm going to try to keep this one fairly brief so that we can get it out in a timely way. And hopefully it won't be too much longer. I mean, it'll take some weeks to get things put back together, and I'll be back there. So again, the lighting is probably not super good, and I'm not using the microphone I usually am. I'm just using the computer microphone. So I apologize if the sound and the picture are not as good, but I am perched in my living room, and I just have this one spot because there are things piled up that got moved from the podcast room around the house. And all this happens is I'm trying to get the last production things going or pre-production things going for the book. So that is continuing, but it's been a little bit of dealing with hiccups for a while. Now, just want to do a relatively quick current event here. And who would have guessed that I would ever be talking about the WNBA, which is, the Women's Basketball League, the pro league, which has operated at a loss since its inception. So they lose about $10 million a year, give or take. It's subsidized by the NBA. And, there are consistent complaints about like, well, why aren't we paid as much as the men? And you're like, because you don't generate the revenue. I mean, it's sort of obvious, or should be. At any rate, the latest thing is that there's a relatively new player. I think this is her second year, isn't it? Caitlin Clark, who is like the best player in the league, they're saying. Some are comparing her to like LeBron James or the equivalent for women, So I don't know how accurate that is. I don't watch the games, but I've been seeing that this is in the news a lot because 2 things. First of all, she's like the goose that's laying golden eggs for the WNBA. They can clearly track that she has increased the gate, meaning ticket sales. They're filling arenas that previously were not filled. She's increased the viewership on TV, and the merchandise that they sell has really jacked up, I think like by 1,000%, one report said. So it's sort of that rising tide lifting all the boats because all the players then are in a better position to negotiate higher salaries, and everybody is getting this spillover of positive outcomes because she has raised so much interest because she is a fun player to watch. Anyway, she's been targeted clearly in some of the games. And again, I don't watch them, but I see clips after whatever, and they'll show that she often gets some, pretty nasty fouls. And the refs aren't calling, which is interesting because the refs also benefit when the WNBA does better. I mean, this hasn't erupted too much, except that recently they did suspend one of the refs because I guess something got really flagrant. And there was a game recently that I saw clips from where she was called for a foul, that it was like a technical foul because she was pushed by somebody out of bounds, and kind of to prevent herself from just barreling into a ref, she kind of put her arm out and the hand kind of hit the ref, but it was clearly a result of her being pushed. And the whole arena could see it, and of course they had the tape, but the ref called her for a technical foul for messing with the ref. It was so absurd that anyway, this one there was enough that the call was reversed. But along with that is a teammate of hers, Sophie Cunningham, who is sort of a self-appointed wingman for Caitlin Clark and tries to protect or defend or whatever in a lot of ways. And then Sophie Cunningham has been in the news because for another reason, which is that she was asked in an interview about a subject which comes up every once in a while about men being in women's sports. And she made a categorical statement about biological men should never compete in women's sports. And then she got a lot of pushback for being transphobic and ridiculous stuff like that. And so it has been in the news again. I should mention before going into that that not protecting Caitlin Clark is so counter their own interest. And it's fascinating because we typically see that people behave in their own self-interest. But I guess I should modify that statement. And there are things written about that everybody is doing something for their interest, but that's not always true. Frankly, anytime we sin, we're not acting in our own self-interest, but there might be at least the immediate gratification involved of pleasure or enjoyment that then is costly down the road. And maybe that's what's going on because to treat this girl who is like the golden goose in a way that she could become injured or get fed up and leave. And some people have even said, oh, she should start her own league because she's not really being very well treated. And I know you can always, complain about the refs. Like, who can't complain about refs? But this does seem like there's a pattern, and it does seem kind of bizarre. You're like, this player has so increased the visibility and the money coming into the league that benefits all of them. Why are they not protecting her? And even if the players don't, why aren't the refs protecting her? And then the coaches, even her own coach, doesn't seem to kind of have her back all the time. Oh, I guess this was that player, Sophie Cunningham, who got clotheslined when she was going up for a basket. I think she actually made the basket, which was amazing, but she took a hard fall from this really flagrant foul and it wasn't called. There was a ref right there. And again, they had the tape and they could run it back and the whole arena saw it and whatever. And finally they called a level 2 flagrant foul and the girl that had committed the foul was ejected from the game. But afterwards, Sophie Cunningham's coach, which is the same as Caitlin Clark's coach, was asked by reporters, what about that foul? And she said, well, I don't think it was intentional. It's like, wait a minute. The whole arena saw that it was intentional. Even the refs who didn't really call it at first had to back up and make it a flagrant ejectable foul. And here's the coach of the girl who got hammered. Anyway, running interference for the offender. It's really counterproductive to think of what's going on there. So it does make you wonder, is it just like this, too much female stuff going on here that I don't know. It's not rational. It's not rational to act against your own self-interest like that, but it seems to be the case. So that's kind of the sidelight that Sophie Cunningham's story has brought up how ridiculous this situation is again, where men compete in women's sports now that they are supposed to be women if they want to be. I mean, it's kind of hilarious in a crazy and tragic way, but it's also evil because it really distorts reality in a very evil way. When we are calling black white or white black or good evil and evil good, there's a violation of truth and reality that is so costly. And it's fascinating that so many people have been really brainwashed into this belief, or maybe they're making money from it, or they're getting likes and clicks, or whatever it is, that they will take these strong stances while saying things that are so illogical and frankly indefensible. So it's concerning. And it does make you think that is this, well, it definitely is light shutting down. Remember, we have been warned in the scriptures that if we don't live according to the light that we have, that from us will be taken even what we had at the first, everyone being born with the light of Christ. But if we keep violating that or sinning against the light or denying the truth that the light testifies of, then the light can be taken away. And we are not static as we go through life when it comes to light. We are either growing in light or the light is receding and it is diminishing in us. This is always the case. And it's sad when a whole society seems to retreat from light, or at least large segments of our society. And I've said this recently, and I'm saying it again. I think that even though right now the political climate with the administration we have right now has been pushing back against this and giving people more confidence to speak out against the irrational transgender ideology, but it's not going away. It's really deeply into the institution. So here's the WNBA, where all these people become apologists. The head of the league, who's a woman, and several coaches or whatever have come out and say, oh, we are so inclusive. And yes, of course, trans women can play in the league. Well, so to call the bluff, two former NBA stars, uh, one is Enes Kanter Freedom, who is from Turkey and came to the US. And when he became a citizen, added freedom to be his new last name. And so he's a real pro-American guy. And then I think it's Royce White, if I'm remembering that right. I could be wrong on that name. But they both declared for the WNBA draft because they said, we meet the criteria because now we're identifying as women, or at least sometimes we're identifying as women. And that seems to be sufficient for the WNBA. So that's what they're doing. And apparently they called sort of an emergency meeting for the leadership of the league because now, I mean, again, if a bunch of guys did that and they wouldn't even have to be former pro players, they were just, the good college players or whatever could decimate that league for women. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when they call a bluff. But again, like that we're still in the headlines that there's a trans guy, and I don't want to say woman, but he's a guy who thinks he's a woman who's playing on a volleyball team at in the NCAA. And there's a kid who's doing the long jump in California that's a boy, but he's identifying as a woman and he's tearing it up. Anyway, it still crops up all over the place. I think it has gone underground, but it's you're going to come roaring back at some point because these people are really rejecting the light and rejecting truth. And whatever they're getting out of it is enough for them to continue. It was interesting to see in one of these interviews about, the whole trans thing, a woman that they don't necessarily like the title, but she accepted that she was what they call a TERF, TERF, which is a trans exclusionary radical feminist. Trans exclusionary radical feminist. So, in other words, they are radical feminists, but they've decided, and there are enough of them that they've created this name for them, that they've decided that they can't support these trans people identifying as women and entering women's spaces and women's sports and so on. But ironically, they're one of the reasons there's a problem because they were against family. They wanted to eliminate the differences between men and women, or at least not acknowledge them and not have them recognized or accommodated in society. So here they were a big preparatory campaign for the whole trans issue. You can see this slippery slope, so to speak, or how Satan plants the seeds there and the next person comes along and waters them. And that's really one of the bases for the whole trans thing is the radical feminists. And I am saying this because I really hope that we can have conversations with our kids again about the term feminism. I know that some of our grandchildren, even who had gone to the Y, and then you're asking about their classes or whatever, and they are hearing from their professors that it's good to be a feminist. You just don't have to agree with everything they do. but it's good to be pro-woman and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, who's more pro-woman than God? Like, you want to find me somebody who's more pro-woman than our Savior Jesus Christ, or more pro-man? Like, we have no better advocates than our Father and our Savior. And so when we elevate this idea, even of, well, I'm kind of a feminist, but in a good way, it's not a good way. The whole idea that we have this title is to create tension between men and women, because the claim is that women were oppressed and now they have to be elevated in order to level the playing field or whatever. Anyway, these are insidious ideas. And I think it's so important to recognize where we might slip into it. It doesn't mean we have to be hateful about it. Of course, we never should be. And it's not about condemning people. But it is about, I mean, whenever I'd hear that from a grandchild, I'd sit and say, well, can I share a few thoughts? And I would explain why I thought this was not a great word to use, because the identification is, again, with something that has made things so adversarial between the sexes and is anti-family, is anti-children, anti-woman, anti-man. Anyway, had to mention that. I think it's really important for us to watch the language. Remember, they've always said this. First, they capture the language. George Orwell talked about this a lot, but others have noticed as well. If they can get us to change the language, then the ideas come with those words, and we start to be more vulnerable to the next level of deterioration of thought. Again, I've quoted this so many times, but Alexander Pope brilliantly talked about how when we first see vice, we hate it because it's hideous. But then, if we see it too often, we first endure, then pity, then embrace. We see that all over the place. Sometimes people complain and they say, oh, stop with the slippery slope arguments. And that has been this common, sort of defense about it. Like, oh, don't say that. That's ridiculous. But we have evidence that the slippery slope is real all over the place. So it's amazing. Again, they're just denying the truth that's right in front of all of us. Okay, I'm only going to mention a few of the Psalms and then end with some thoughts about music in general. But again, I hope you really enjoy reading these this week and next week. As again, I'm just going to touch on a few. Psalm 19, verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. I love that last phrase. There's actually a lot of meaning to this. And I think that it is important to embrace that idea and gain a testimony, a true conversion to the idea that the law of the Lord is perfect. This is mentioned a lot in the Boundaries book. It comes up a lot in the trajectory of what I'm writing, that sometimes we think that principles that come from the gospel are in conflict, or that they both can't be true at the same time. So you have to sort of choose one or reject the reality of some of God's things, or say that, he didn't mean it or whatever. And, I really take a different approach to that. I really believe that if we are feeling that we're getting mixed messages from the gospel, we need to increase our understanding, because the law of the Lord is perfect. He doesn't work against himself. He's not in contradiction. He always has the best way. So many times in my life over the years, Chris and I would talk about this, about things that might at first glance seem like they're in conflict, that both come from principles of the gospel. And then we would say, okay, well, where is the perspective that's going to help us understand better what's going on and see that both of these things work and operate in harmony? So a lot of the book is about that, or at least it starts with that idea that sometimes it seems like acting charitably and kindly with forgiveness and tolerance can't coexist with safety. But of course they can, because the Lord doesn't operate in contradiction. And he wants us to be safe, to act and not be acted upon. And he does want us to be kind. And if we understand charity better, we see how those harmonize. They don't conflict. Anyway, it's been really a delight to finally get these things into a manuscript. The law of the Lord is perfect. And then, of course, I love this last phrase, making wise the simple. Doesn't that describe each one of us? I mean, we are simpletons in comparison with the vast and perfect and unlimited all-knowingness of our Father in heaven. But he can make us wise if we obey, if we are converted, as the verse said. Anyway, I love that one. I think that's really beautiful. Psalm 22, another messianic psalm of David. Of course, this is incredibly prophetic. It starts with what Christ will say on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And the Lord speaks to his people if we are ready to hear. And then a little bit later, verse 14 of Psalm 22, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. Really a tender description of Christ's suffering for us. Later, in verse 16 at the end, they pierced my hands and my feet. Verse 18, they part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. All of these things were literally fulfilled. Of course, I have to mention the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. I'm going to mention something about that a little bit later as well, but this is a really very short psalm. It's so many verses. It's only 6 verses. So many musical renditions of this, and it's so often said at times of trouble. I love these words. I'm going to point out a couple of places where Joseph Smith corrected some of the Psalms. And I don't know that I ever noticed that before. This time I was checking the footnotes, and there are a couple of places where Joseph Smith corrected or expanded the understanding of the Psalm in beautiful ways. Of course, Psalm 24 is the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. These are words that are used in the libretto of the Messiah. They're really beautiful. And honestly, it's hard for me to read them without the music in my head. I mentioned that before. I kind of want to sing along sometimes because I have sung these Messiah choruses in choirs before. And they're just delightful words. But I had not known that toward the latter part of the 24th Psalm, verse 7, Joseph Smith added to our understanding here. This is the verse, lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be lift up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Now, let's check out what Joseph Smith wrote that I really liked. Psalm 24, starting with verse 7, and it does go to the end. It does all the last 4 verses, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Lift up your heads, O ye generations of Jacob. Every time I go through the Old Testament, I have a greater love, another level of love for these great patriarchs and prophets and faithful people of the Old Testament. And this one, I mean, so our son Dominic, a few months ago, saw that Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat was going to come to the Hale Center Theater in Sandy. And so he invited all the Utah family. We have half of our kids here and half that are elsewhere, but he invited all of us that were here to come and see the play together. And this is, of course, an Andrew Weber and Tim Rice operetta. I mean, it's really fun. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Of course, Donny Osmond did a great Joseph, and that was really delightful. But when my kids were very young, I had a soundtrack that I play for them when we were on car rides or traveling or, whatever. And they learned the music really well. And the whole thing is music, right? So it's the whole thing. And I think they have it memorized. I listen to this so often. I might miss a few words here and there, but I'm still not 100% on the colors of the code. But I'm pretty good. And I noticed that this time. It was really well done, and it's just a fun show. But there was a place at the end, and this was different staging or interpretation than I have seen in other times where I have watched this on the stage. And it was when Jacob comes to Egypt. So after the brothers know that it's Joseph, then he says, go get my father and bring him here. And it says that Joseph went to meet his father in the chariot of gold. Well, in this staging of it, they show Jacob bowing down in front of Joseph. Now, Joseph doesn't ask for that, but I've never seen that depicted in that way before. I've just seen the embrace shown, but they showed him bowing down, and I thought, well, that's the dream, right? That was the one that Jacob didn't like too much, where the sun, moon, and stars all bowed to Joseph's star. And that included his mother and father. And Jacob heard it and was a little bit tweaked at that, remember? But here it showed him bowing down in front of Joseph. And then Joseph, of course, going and lifting him up and embracing him. And honestly, tears came to my eyes. And I think it was because, again, going through the Old Testament this time, I just have such a love for these men. Joseph, of course, is one of the great heroes of the Old Testament and of all scripture, remaining faithful through such difficulties. And he loved his father, and his father loved him. And to see that reunion depicted in that tender way was emotional for me. I mean, it's such a fun show that I had never thought I would tear up at it, but I did. So I loved this when I read what Joseph Smith added. Jacob is the one who gives these prophecies of all the tribes, all his sons and their descendants. And of course, when he comes to Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, Manasseh was the elder, and Joseph is guiding because Jacob's almost blind, guiding his father's right hand to Manasseh's head, because Manasseh is the elder, and then the left hand on Ephraim. But Jacob crosses his hands to put his right hand, the birthright hand, on Ephraim and the left hand on Manasseh. And he says that Manasseh will be great. And in the last days, Manasseh is prophesied to help to build the New Jerusalem. But Ephraim, he said, will be greater, not because God is a respecter of persons, but because the mission of Ephraim is to begin the gathering, which it did already. So it's extraordinary to see that we are living in a time of so much fulfilled prophecy. And anyway, so it was tender to me to read that, this is what he added to this psalm. Lift up your heads, O ye generations of Jacob, the house of Israel, and be ye lifted up. And the Lord will establish you forever, and he will roll away the heavens and come down to redeem his people, to make you an everlasting name, to establish you on his everlasting rock. Lift up your heads, ye everlasting generations. I'm skipping a little bit, but again, he shall establish them in righteousness. Anyway, that was really tender to me. And I love that Joseph Smith gave us this incredible gift, along with a whole bunch of other gifts, to tell us more about what God has revealed. Okay, did I skip anything? Just a couple more. Psalm 30. This is another JST edition that's right here in the footnote this time. His anger endureth but a moment, in his favor is life. Weeping may endure for a night. Many of us quote this, right? Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. And in the footnote, for his anger kindleth against the wicked. This is something he tells us repeatedly. They repent, and in a moment it is turned away. How generous is our God? And because of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ, even when we have been wicked or weak or rebellious, if we repent, in an instant it is turned away. And they are in his favor, and he giveth them life. Therefore, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. That context is so much more than what we often hear or say. There's another one that Joseph Smith corrected in Psalm 32. Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. And I love this too. Blessed are they whose transgressions are forgiven and who have no sins to be covered. Now, we know that all of us fall short sometimes. So, we're all sinners at some level. But I think this is really still a great acknowledgement of people who are diligent and try to stay on the covenant path. In other words, yes, we've screwed up, but we don't have to keep screwing up. And how much does that please the Lord? How blessed are his people who don't keep sinning and don't have to constantly come back for forgiveness. Again, we're not perfect as we go on, and we can come and we should come so that the Lord can forgive us in an instant if we are honest in heart and make the efforts to complete the process of change. But he is giving a shout out here to, like, you don't have to make all the mistakes. You just don't have to touch all the hot stoves. You really don't have to dangle over the cliff edge. You don't have to. And how much more blessed are you if you don't? So those who choose that path, sometimes we feel a little bit unheralded, maybe like, we're just in a piece of the furniture because sometimes it's the prodigal son that gets more of the attention. But the Lord knows, and he is giving us a shout out right here if we are on that path. And then the last one, the 46th Psalm. Just wanted to take a minute here. Very first two verses. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Sometimes we don't feel that he is right there, but he is. He is present. And then it's our journey to receive that and to figure out how to hear it and feel it and be able to embrace it. I speak from my own experience there. Second verse, therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Now, what I wanted to point out here is that he's not saying, therefore we won't fear because our lives are good and we don't have any troubles right now, and there's lots of money in the bank and food in our bellies, and we're getting really good sleep at night, and everybody is happy, and kids are all doing the right thing, and our marriages are great. Like, that's not why we don't fear. It's because we choose not to fear when all hell is breaking loose. And I thought that was such an important point. I mean, it's not like it's new. It's stated in many places in similar ways, but it's a good note to ourselves that he's not asking us to fear because there's nothing to fear. He's asking us not to fear when there are all kinds of things that seem to be ready to generate fear in us. And he's saying, don't go there. You don't need to go there because I am your refuge. I am your strength. I am present even when you don't feel it, when you don't see it yet. Don't doubt it. Choose not to fear. Stretch your faith over your fear so that we can praise him as our refuge, knowing that, again, if we persist with patience and faith and trust in the Lord, all our wounds will be healed. Justice will be accomplished. Restoration of all that has been lost or damaged will come to the faithful. I love that. And of course, also in the 46th Psalm, verse 10, another very familiar verse, be still and know that I am God. I've mentioned this before, but when Chris and I first got into meditation, I was, anyway, I had been exposed to it at a conference, just speaking to another conference attender. It was a former monk, really interesting guy, who had then became a social worker after he left the monastery. And now he was retired, working in hospice and doing a lot of meditation with people. And so, anyway, we had this interesting conversation, and I asked him, well, so where could I read more about meditation? Now, this was before it became so mainstream. I guess this was, honestly, we were kind of cutting edge on this because we met this guy. But he said, well, anything by this author, whatever. Anyway, so I got a book immediately and started reading it. And then I'd read parts to Chris and we discussed, and we started meditating in the morning, along with scriptures and whatever. And we were very good about it at first. And I've certainly had my ups and downs with it in recent years, but I am a big believer and I know it's a gift. And I saw, as I was reading about all these incredible measurable benefits that come that have been studied. And again, now this is very mainstream, but it was early on, so it was new to find out all these studies that had been done that showed incredible benefits from meditation. And I was like, okay, I know that all good ideas come from God. So I thought, where is this in the gospel of Jesus Christ? It has to be there because God has all truth. And it occurred to me that in the apostasy, that story about how the mirror broke and the Catholics got this part and the Protestants, this Presbyterians got this and the Methodists got this and the Baptists got this. Everybody got a piece of the truth, but nobody had the whole truth until the Restoration gave us the whole mirror again. Well, it occurred to me that the Buddhists got this part of the mirror because they're big into meditation. And so a lot of times people were a little resistant to begin with because they're like, oh, that's sort of another religion. And I'm like, no, all good ideas come from God and all truth is in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. So like the first thing that occurred to me when I had that thought was be still and know that I am God. I'm like, that's meditation. Of course, the whole idea of pondering in prayer, and I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. I thought the sacrament is guided meditation every week. The Lord invites us to kind of clear our minds and focus on the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ. That's a communal meditation. We've talked about how heart rates can synchronize, brain waves. Anyway, it's amazing. And then I was on my way to the temple just a few days later after I'd been talking to Chris about this, and I thought, the temple is a house of guided meditation. Again, we're asked to leave our cares to the side and to come in and ponder together on the truths of eternity, the plan of salvation, the way to come back into God's presence. So anyway, it was everywhere. It was everywhere. The minute I thought, of course, it's in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So be still and know that I am God. And we can all benefit from this truth that is fundamental and not be deceived into thinking that some people or some groups have truth that we don't have. That's not true. We may not talk about it enough. We may not celebrate it enough, but we have been given all the truth. Okay, just a few more things on meditation. Well, actually, it's this song because, of course, the Psalms were meant to be sung together. And so it's like a hymnal that we're reading as we read the book of Psalms. Anyway, I looked up some things about religious music. And I have a whole playlist of gospel music. One of my daughters calls it Jesus music, and it's beautiful praise of the Savior. And like I've said before, some of those born agains really know how to praise Jesus. And it's beautiful. And I'm very selective. I don't want stuff that's false doctrine, but I really love a lot of the gospel singers and how beautiful their praise is. But it was interesting because I saw something that compared contemporary Christian, that gospel music stuff that I'm talking about that I do really love, and traditional hymns. And it made a lot of sense to me. Contemporary Christian, like the gospel music, has high arousal psychologically, very euphoric, a lot of passion and release. Traditional hymns are more of a low psychological arousal level, more feelings of peace, stability, and reverence. And I thought that's so true. Like, the Pentecostals are big, and not that gospel music is all Pentecostal, but it's often associated with that, the dancing and the bring the guitar into the church and maybe even a drum set, whatever, to praise God in these more highly emotional states, right? But the hymns are this low psychological arousal level, but it brings peace, stability, and reverence. And I thought that makes so much sense when you think about how we worship in our sacrament meetings. The focus of intimacy is different. The gospel music is very individualistic, so it uses a lot of I and then you referring to deity. So it's this intimate connection. Traditional hymns are about we and our. That's more the language, we and our, which is a shared experience and belief. Gospel music is intuitive, experiential, and meditative in its repetition of choruses and phrasing that it will, repeat again and again. Traditional hymns are analytical and they're a doctrinal study. Now, I have loved the doctrine of our hymns, and I have learned a lot about the gospel of Jesus Christ from singing the hymns my whole life. Again, I say this every once in a while, but please sing. I don't care what your voice is like. I don't care if you can carry a tune in a bucket or not. Please sing the hymns. You can sing it softly if you don't want anybody to hear, although that's not necessary either because it is about making a joyful noise. But please saying them aloud, speaking the words aloud, singing slash speaking, however it comes out of us, is different from just thinking or listening. It stays with us in a different way. It does something different in our brain when we vocalize. Please teach your kids to sing. I'm always so sad if I see the deacons not singing or, the youth on the stand or whatever. Anyway, some of them do, and it's wonderful. And of course, not just the youth. Too many adults don't sing either. Gospel music is high stimulation. Again, you can tell, it's often more of a performance, there's a lot of instrumentation. So the hymns, traditional hymns, are low stimulation. It's the communal voice that carries the music. We have the organ or the piano backing us up, but they're playing the parts that we're singing. So it's not like, counter sort of accompaniment that is to embellish, it's to support what we are singing in the bars of the music. Another thing about traditional hymns, a lot of studies that show that it creates unity through active vocal synchronization. And again, there's a heart synchronization that happens, brain waves synchrony. I've talked about that recently. Hymns are structurally designed for the congregation to lead the sound rather than, again, a stage band or orchestra. Singing complex 4-part harmony requires deep listening and physiological synchronization. So our breathing and heart rates, as I've said, start to match. And it can foster a strong sense of democratic communal connection, like shared, where everybody is participating. So I thought that was really beautiful to see that as much as I love the gospel music, and I do, the hymns carry something different into our experience and our shared worship. Please sing the hymns. And as I read this, it made me think about the fact that after I lost Chris, I could not play my gospel playlist for over a year. I couldn't do it. I thought about doing it. I couldn't do it. There were a couple, I guess, of exceptions to that I'll talk about on Patreon, but I couldn't listen to them. I don't know. It was the high emotion of it or how personal it was. I just couldn't do it. And the hymns were also tender to me, and I would tear up during the hymns, particularly the sacrament hymns. But it wasn't very long before, and from the beginning, I was able to try to sing. Anyway, as I thought about these differences, it actually made sense to me that I was able to share with the worship of the congregation more quickly than I could kind of have that more emotional, high excitement, energy connection. I wasn't in a place to embrace that. It's come back. I don't listen as much as I used to, but I will, and I do love that list. And was just sharing a personal experience there that kind of clicked for me as I read through those differences. Now, a couple of lovely thoughts on the Psalms. This is from Athanasius, who was a 4th century theologian. He said, the Psalms become like a mirror to the person singing them. A mirror to the person singing them, so that he might perceive himself and the emotions of his soul. And again, we cover the whole spectrum of emotion in the Psalms. Joy, anguish, the whole spectrum of human emotion is there. This is from another theologian, Basil of Caesarea. A psalm drives away demons, summons the help of angels, furnishes arms against nightly terrors, and gives respite from daily toil. To little children, it is safety. To men in their prime, an adornment. To the old, a solace. To women, their most fitting ornament. It peoples solitudes. It brings agreement to marketplaces. To novices, it is a beginning. To those who are advancing, an increase. To those who are concluding, a confirmation. A psalm is the voice of the church. I thought that was beautiful. And when it talked about, that it furnishes arms against nightly terrors, well, I didn't have nightly terrors, but sometimes when I and I still don't sleep super well. But that first year was really brutal, and I didn't sleep very much or very well. And I started to recite the 23rd Psalm. I'd stay in bed and try to go back to sleep. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And it did bring me solace and comfort, and it was a reaffirmation of my faith and my trust in the Lord, even in this time of extremity. So I love how this author, Basil of Caesarea, captures that for each stage of our lives. One author, I don't know who he was, he's a Christian author though, Gordon Wenham, says, the Psalms are designed to be prayed. And I thought that was nice. These are prayers. Ellen F. Davis, another religious writer, the Psalms enable us to bring into our conversation with God feelings and thoughts most of us think we need to get rid of before God will be interested in hearing from us. I love that. I believe it 100%. In other words, sometimes we don't want to pray because we're in a really distressed place or have a lot of negative feelings, or we're angry or hurt, or we feel abandoned. And she is reminding us that no, these should be brought into our conversation with God. Not that we need to get rid of them before we talk to him or before he wants to listen to us, but we should take them. And again, it's basically what my mother said when I was, like, honestly, probably 12 years old. It's okay to be angry at God as long as you tell him about it. So take our pain to God, take our angst, take our anger. It's safe with him, and we don't have to hide that or recover from it before we speak to him, and we don't have to ever feel that he will reject us because of those feelings. Then two statements that are so wonderful by C.S. Lewis. Of course, they would be right. Fully to enjoy is to glorify. In commanding us to glorify him, God is inviting us to enjoy him. And he was speaking about the Psalms when he wrote this. Fully to enjoy is to glorify. I hadn't thought about glorify and enjoy as synonyms, but that's what he's saying, that they're synonyms. Fully to enjoy is to glorify. In commanding us to glorify him, God is inviting us to enjoy him. That's a very beautiful thought. And then this is, again, C.S. Lewis. The most valuable things the Psalms do for me is to express that same delight in God which made David dance. One more time. The most valuable thing the Psalms do for me is to express that same delight in God which made David dance. I hope you found Psalms that spoke to you and that you love and that help us enjoy God as we glorify him. Let's sing our hymns. It's part of building Zion. As ever, let's choose celestial glory. Let's become a Zion-ready people. My deep thanks to my husband, Chris Anderson, and Doug Larson of Point Digital. Take care.